Okay, so I've got my recoil lug in the stock. I put a piece of tape on the edge of the stock right here. I'm going to try to keep this in the camera as much as I can and show you guys how I'm going to mark this. So I'm just going to take an ink pen and I'm going to mark right here where the recoil lug is going to sit. Okay, so that's where we're going to cut the shoulder to on the barrel. So now I'm going to pull the recoil lug out and we're going to set the barrel in the stock, slide it up here until it looks where I want it to be. And remember guys, I'm trying to do this on the camera and watch the camera at the same time I'm doing the work, so it may look like I'm fumbling around some, and I am, but that's because I'm trying to do two things at once and I don't have a cameraman. So we're going to slide that up just until the contour starts to meet with this barrel. Alright, then I'm going to take this black magic marker right here and I'm going to put my mark right here. That is where I want this recoil lug to sit. It needs to sit right there when we're done with the chambering job and the threading. So the tenon, the barrel's a little long, the stub on here is going to get cut off a little bit, but we're going to measure from here back, and that's where we're going to know where to cut this off. So right there we go. And now we are ready to put the barrel in the machine. Okay fellas, we got the barrel in the machine. I've got the indicator. The way I put my barrels in, I indicate them at both ends of the machine. On both ends of the spindle they're indicated in. I use a 10th indicator. I use a long needle and I go up in the bore of the barrel as far as I can and I indicate off of the lands. So if we rotate this around, you can see the high spot right there at 3. Rotate it again to the next one and we got a high spot at 3. Well, let's call it 4 8/10. Rotate it again, 4 8/10. Rotate it again, 4 8/10. Rotate it again, 4 8/10. So we've got 4 grooves, 4 lands in this barrel. So we're getting 4 8/10 off of each land. We can't get no better than this. So this barrel is ready to cut and chamber. Now I already cut off the stub. I've cut off the stub that we're not going to use, the dropped piece, and I've got it marked 953 thousandths, I think is what my measurement was for the tenon length. We're going to turn that down and then we're going to thread it. I'll get back to you guys after we've got that done. Okay fellas, there's the tenon turned. We're 1.060 diameter and we're 953 long sticking out. Now I got to remember this is a fluted barrel and I'm going to try to time those flutes, so I may have to come back just a little bit further on this in order to get the flutes to time up. I want one of those to time at exactly 12 o'clock. So once I thread it and screw the action on, I'm going to see where they're going to line up at. And I marked them. That's what the blue die comes for. So the flutes have been marked. And we're going to go ahead and cut the threads, check the action for a fit, and get that action screwing on where we want it to stop. Now one thing I want to point out to you guys is when you cut a tenon on a gun barrel, you should never dig a big groove back here. I know everybody does it. I've seen it over and over on all the Facebook, on the YouTube videos, where they want to cut a great big groove back here in the back of the barrel for what they call tool relief for their threader. It's for the next operation. Well, you don't need a tool relief. You just need to learn how to withdraw and disengage at the same time. So it's easy for me. I've been doing it for years. You disengage your half nut and you withdraw the thread at the same time. I wish I could show you all how to do this, but it's impossible. without a videographer and somebody to run the camera while I run the machine. But never ever cut a big deep groove in there. And another thing is, never make this corner right here square. You do not want a square cut on that corner. It stresses the steel, makes it easier to break, and makes it a whole lot weaker. And so does cutting that groove. And I know a ton of people cut that groove in there, so let's not do that on a custom rifle build. If you're going to build rifles and cut barrel threads and tenons, you need to make sure that you do not cut that big ugly groove in there. I'll show you some examples of those here later. Okay fellas, we now have the threads on the tenon, and if we roll them around, you can see where the thread just kind of leads out right here at the end, the very last thread, and just disappears. And you can see how close I got up to that shoulder. Now the reason a lot of people put that big gouge in there is they're afraid to run into the barrel. They're afraid of running into the shoulder. They can't disengage and withdraw their tool fast enough to run into it. Well, if that's the case, slow the machine down so it's not feeding so quick, or just keep practicing until you figure out how to do it, because that is the way it needs to be done. We do not want that ugly gouge in that barrel tenon. It weakens it, and just, it's wrong. So please don't do that. It should look just like this. They'll put a big old gouge in there and they run their tool upside down, and they start on the inside and they go backwards. That really ain't a good way to do it either, in my opinion. But if that's the only way you can do it, I guess do it that way. But learn how to do it this way. That's the right way, and one of these days I may be able to show you exactly how to do it on camera, if somebody can come in here and operate the video camera for me. So we did thread the action on the barrel, and I had to set this shoulder back 6/1000ths in order to get it to line up with the flute. So we've now got the flute lining up at 12 o'clock. I'm ready to cut the bolt bore right here, the countersink for the bolt bore. I'm ready to cut that. I'm also going to do that with a single point boring bar. They make a tool to do that with, but I don't know why you would buy one. If you got a single point boring bar, you can cut any diameter you want. If you buy the tool from Pacific Tool and Gauge, it only cuts 705, so you don't have a choice if you wanted 704 or 710, or if you was doing a different action that had a bigger bolt nose on it, you'd have to buy another tool. If you buy a single point boring bar, you only need one tool. And another thing I'll tell you while I'm here is you want to keep your work as close to the chuck as possible. Now this one's a little bit closer than I would normally have it. I usually leave it sticking out 3/8 or maybe a 1/2 of an inch from the chuck, but there's not much shank on this barrel, so we have to clamp it here, because if we clamped it back here, we'd be on the taper of the barrel and it just would not hold. It would just make a mess. That's not going to work for us, so you have to improvise and clamp it where you can clamp it. So that's where we're at. We're about 1/8 of an inch, less than 3/16 of an inch away from the chuck jaws. You just have to be confident that you're not going to run into them, know how to operate your machine, and you won't be worried about that. So let's do the bolt bore, and we'll get back to you after that's done. Okay fellas, we got the bolt bore put in there. That's for the bolt nose, recessed bolt nose right there. That's put in. It's chamfered on the edge. I like to put a 45-degree chamfer on there, about 100 thousandths wide or so. There's no magic number on that. Just cut it till it looks good, and that way your cartridges can slide in there. You don't get a bunch of scratches on your cartridges and shaving brass off. I have seen some people that will leave that 100% square and sharp, and that's wrong also. You make sure you chamfer those, and then you're also going to polish it when we're done. We'll polish that up real nice with 600 grit sandpaper and get that looking really good. So now we are ready to put the action on, check the bolt for a fit. Okay, so we got the action screwed onto the tenon. It's onto the barrel, whatever you want to call it. And we are going to close the bolt, and you want that bolt to just fall down. You want to make sure that it's not hitting anything in there. You got to have some clearance. And you also want this to move back and forth. You can see that maybe. You can hear it clicking. It's moving maybe 10 thousandths. That's perfect. That's what you want. You want a little clearance in here. Absolutely set that up with a little play back and forth. Now you don't want too much and you don't want none. You just want that happy medium. And I always set it up for 10 thousandths. So I'll just take those measurements into consideration. I cut my tenon shorter, and I bore the bolt nose raceway a little shorter by 10 thousandths, and that gives me my 10 thousandths of clearance here. Definitely want that, fellas. Okay guys, we're ready to start the chambering process. I've already got my chamber reamer over here, and I've got my throating reamer over here. So we've got a Bald Eagle chamber reamer. This is a Bald Eagle floating reamer holder. It's the only one I've ever bought. I've had it for a long time. And then once I seen how easy this was to make, I made several more. I've got 3 or 4 of these now, and I can keep one for a throater, one for neck reamer, one for the chamber reamer. Whatever I need, I don't have to keep switching them back and forth. So I've got several of these, but I only bought one, and I've had it for a long time, so it's done a really good job. I don't see any reason why to switch. I don't see any advantage in having these big fancy chamber reamer holders that mount to your tailstock, and you have to indicate them in and line them up, and they got springs and screws and all kinds of stuff. It's just more stuff to go wrong, in my opinion. You can't go wrong with this system. A floating pilot goes in the bore. You've got a little ball-headed driver that sits back here so that this can actually float around if you were off. Now, if you indicate the barrel and you get the barrel right, you don't have to worry about it. But let's say you're off a thousandth or two. I don't know, let's say one of you guys out there don't have a 4-jaw chuck and you can't indicate the barrel, and you're doing it in a 3-jaw chuck, and I know there's guys that's doing it in a 3-jaw chuck. It's not right, but they do it. And it's floating around like this. So as it's turning in the lathe, your barrel's going like this. Well, that will allow this reamer to float and follow the bore of the barrel, not what you're mounted to. If this is mounted solid and it's off a 1/2 thousandth in one direction, up, down, backwards, sideways, or whatever, if it's off a half, it's going to cut 1 thousandths too big. If it's off 1 thousandths, it's going to cut 2 thousandths too big. So all these fancy things that people are making and designing and selling for $300-400, I just think it's crazy. Don't buy them. This is all you need right here. So let's start this chambering reamer process. And a 223 is the easiest reamer you can use. The easiest chamber you're probably ever going to cut, because you're not taking out a bunch of metal. And if you don't believe me, set up a barrel, chamber it for 223, and then tomorrow night set one up and chamber it for 338 Lapua, and you'll tell me that they're not different. This thing will chamber out so easy. It's just easy. But the bigger the reamer, the more material you're taking out. The harder it is to do, the longer it takes, the slower you have to go, the less increments you can use. So it just takes a long time. We're only going to go in maybe 100 thousandths a time, and then we're going to pull it out, clean the reamer, go another 100, pull it out, clean the reamer. Once we get down closer, we'll probably stop and start doing 50,000 increments. When we get down to really nitty gritty, we're only going to go in 2 or 3 and check our headspace. If we need 2 more, we're going to go in 1. If we need 1 more, we're going to go in a half, until we get to where we need to be on our headspace. We want to set that just perfect. We only got one shot at this because it's a fluted barrel. Remember, if you go too deep on the headspace, that's easy to fix. You can just set the barrel back. But with it fluted, you got to set it back to at least the next flute, and then go back in with the chamber reamer again. So you have to get it right the first time, and just take your time and you can do it. So let's get set up for this chambering process. We're not going to use any drill bits. I've seen guys do that. They'll take and run a drill bit 3 inches up into the barrel to remove all the material so that the reamer don't have to do all the work. Well, they've drilled so far up in there now that the pilot is not even following the bore of the barrel. Now, the pilot's just up in here floating around doing whatever it wants to do, and they're trying to hold this and make it go straight in the barrel, and there's no way you can make that work. It's going to go in, and it'll be going in like this, angled, and then it's going to line up with the bore of the barrel, and then it's going to start coming down and lining up and finally getting straight. But by that time you've done overcut your chamber, and it's just hard to fix. So do it this way, you won't have problems. So we're going to set up and we're going to chamber this barrel real quick.